Good evening. It is welcome to the Iconic Production channel. I am JM, and you may notice that I am alone tonight. There is no one in the studio here with me. It is the St. Valentine's Day, and so most of my players were like, "We're out." So I hate disappointing Greg, just more than anything. And it's good to see Greg and Phantom and Rook and Restar here. And so, seeing as that is not a holiday that Trish and I choose to celebrate, I am here tonight. We're going to talk Savage Worlds. Greg has brought his blue suede shoes. You can have a Benny for that delightful reference. And we're going to be talking about the setting of our next show on Iconic. The setting is broadly sketched out. We're actually going to do another setting design episode where I'm going to have the players, we're going to have a setting design session on Sunday, kind of refine a lot of the ideas, allow the players to have a lot of input into the setting. And we are going to go, we'll be releasing that first to patrons and then to everyone else. So we're designing a setting for Savage Worlds. We're going to be running Savage Worlds on the stream for a while. And tonight is a night to just talk through the setting with the chat. If you guys want to, I'd love to have your input. If you guys have cool ideas, things that I can take and spin, refine, put in the setting, I would love to be able to do that. So this is sort of a chat DM interaction where we're going to refine a lot of the setting, create a lot of the setting that my players will take and then distill, and I'm going to put out the setting guide with the new hindrances, the new setting rules, the new edges, the way magic is going to work. I'm going to try and get that all compiled and put out for the patrons of Iconic Production. So that's kind of what we're doing tonight. Restar, good to see you. Not at the table, so it's a sad night for me, but I'm always glad to see you in the chat. I have my coffee, my cognac in my Cthulhu glass, thanks to Abby from the Fading Suns game for this one. And I am ready to talk about this. I love the Pinky and the Brain references that we've got going in the chat. You guys always... This is one of the reasons that I continue to love to run games on the Iconic Production channel. I love our chat. I love the fact that we have what I think is a pretty unique format on our stream games. Starting with Torg, we took information from the chat, took suggestions, gave meta currency, so the possibility in Torg, out to the Infiniverse that contained all of you. And you guys were able to spend that possibility back on people in the show. I think Restar was one of the, that's how you actually got connected with Iconic. You threw something out in the chat and we picked it up and ran with it. So that's something I'd like to continue. And what we're calling the Crucible is going to be starting sometime in March. We're actually going to finish up our Deadlands game next week. And then I have a very exciting, I get to run Pan Pacifica again, which is a Cosm and Torg that I am deeply in love with. We're going to get the crew together, going to run a heist mission in Pan Pacifica against the Kanawa Corp. Always excited to do that. 2 or 3 sessions, not sure how long that will last. And then we're going to jump into our new Suede campaign. So, what we have so far, I'm kind of talk through the setting as it is. And I always enjoy starting campaigns off with a quote or a statement. I'm working on a little intro video for the Crucible, and so here's what we're thinking is the initial setting. In the beginning, the tower was drawn from the stillness of the void by the will and the word. All creation spun out from the tower, and the Crucible which was formed around it. Countless ripples, a myriad of universes, appeared in the stillness of the void. The void has hated the tower since its inception, and ever plots its destruction. So we're taking a game setting, we're making a game setting that is very much in the genre of Planescape, of The Dark Tower by Stephen King, of, well, several other Thieves' World to an extent, Lankmar. This idea where the city is the setting, and the setting is essentially all that there is. Things come into the city, things may drain from the city, but in the end, it's the story of a city. So there's going to be a lot of noir, grimdark themes going on in there, as well as chances for adventure. I think the term that we coined when we did our first introduction of the setting was Arcanopunk. So not high technology, not necessarily high fantasy, but a blending of the two that allows for the existence of prosthetic limbs that replace those lost. The great factions of the Crucible, which vie for control of the city and therefore control of existence, working their way through echoes and shades, people who have been drawn to the Crucible through a variety of means. So essentially, the players are both the runners, the agents that slip by and are used by the great factions as pawns on a chessboard. But they're used that way because they're really the only people that can affect lasting change in reality. It may get a little heady, but looking at the group I have, I don't know. It may be any philosophical themes will be interacted with or set down or kicked into the gutter at their leisure. So yeah, that's what we're going to talk about tonight. I'm going to talk about the great factions. I'm going to talk about the setting rules that we're developing. We're going to talk about things that you guys want to see added into a campaign setting that is being streamed on the internet. On the Iconic Discord, Ben, who is in the chat tonight, said he really likes the idea of legacy weapons, legacy items of great power that fall into the hands of people almost with a mind of their own. To go back to our Torg thing, Eternity Shards or Darkness devices. Actually, I really like the idea of the possibility of the characters coming across a sentient artifact of the void. So I'll pause and write these down, but actually I don't need to. JM in the future, listen to me and write that down. Void items. I also think that we're going to play with a mechanic that was first seen in Savage Rifts, which is the burn die, the for juicers. I have this idea of, we talked about subsummation in the previous channel, where the city may empower individuals for its own arcane and eldritch purposes. And the more you lean into that, the more powerful you get at the expense of your sense of identity, and eventually you disappear. Additionally, the way paladins are going to work in this setting, we're calling them, let me pull this up. Yes. Celestial anchors. So much like Sigil, the gods aren't allowed into the Crucible. That doesn't mean they don't send agents. And the one way around this is something called a celestial anchor. There are what would be called in other games paladins. Conduits exist between them and the gods. Sometimes voluntarily. A zealot, a prophet, a warrior of a specific cult or bent. Sometimes it's involuntary. You just happen to have the right metaphysical alignment that allows this god to drop a conduit into your soul. If you think about it, very few prophets would have chosen the life that was sort of thrust upon them. Some do, some seek greatness, and some have greatness thrust upon them. So the idea with the anchors and the anchorites are the fact that they will be able to go out and affect the will of the gods in a place that is inherently incremental to deific power. And they too will have a conduit die. I'm going to go through all of the different things and then I'll explain the mechanic as we're thinking of it. And then we're going to have the void dice. The dice for those things that are powered, drawing from the energy of the interstitial space, the space between realities. As more realities are created, they sort of butt up against each other, and there's less and less of the void, which just causes it to seethe more and more. We're going to change the name from the void probably, but who knows? I like the void. The chaos, we'll see. Nope, I'm pretty sure the bleed I would have, that would probably be definitely something from Torg. And as much as I love Torg and may pick up some things from it, I think I'm going to stay away from that one. But that's an interesting point because fallen and broken and destroyed realities do still have remnants that make their way to the Crucible. And if you are playing in a city where reality can be affected, what's to say that a dead reality has to stay dead? So anyway, these things will constantly be a power source for some types of characters. Conduit are anchorites, so, those who follow the gods. The subsumed, those who have been empowered by the city. And what we're currently calling the Edgewalkers. Those who live on the edge of reality, can see the cracks in it, who are hoping to draw forth the entities that live beyond, between realities. And if you are access to any one of these edges, willingly or unwillingly, you will get a die. Now this die can be used to add, at any point you can invoke your conduit as an anchorite, you can invoke your this void die, you can invoke your subsumation die, and it adds to your die roll. So if you're familiar with Savage Worlds, the basic difficulty is 4. Give that man a Benny Restar. So the idea here is going to be that you can call on this power for aid. But whenever you do, 2 things happen. 1, there is a chance that you may lose control of your character for a moment. Rook is a key example of somebody who loved to indulge in this ability that the Harrowed had. Exactly, Rook. That's kind of what we're going with. The idea that the city wants agents of its own. The other thing is if the die aces, meaning it explodes, you roll the maximum number on the die, 2 things happen. 1, congratulations. The die will increase at the end of the scene by 1 type. D4 to D6, D6 to D8, D8 to D10, D12. The other thing that will happen is at various points on your track, you may get new hindrances to balance out the fact that you have access to this extra die that no one else does. But the other thing is when you roll a D12 and it aces, that is the end of your character. You will need to choose very carefully how your character will exit the scene. Do you go out in a blaze of glory? Do you sink away? But in these cases, in the case of subsumation, the city takes you somewhere and you are not seen again. The case of a anchorite, your connection between you and your deity is too powerful to allow to remain in the city. It burns you out. And we're not going to discuss what happens in the case of Edgewalkers because that would be telling. So, when it comes to magic, figure that'll be a good place to start next. Do you guys want to know magic or the factions next? Maybe I'll start with the factions, because that feels like... Again, if you have any ideas, please toss them in the chat, because I love interaction and the desire to, I think collaborative is the best type of creation. All right, Becca, I see you. Becca will be sneakily involved in our setting creation session on Sunday. So if you see her in the video that goes live, you will know why. Now the other thing is I am hoping to get iconic familiar faces, patrons, people who have played in games before with me, and people in the chat who are free to do guest stars for 1 or 2 episodes as NPCs, as allies of the PCs, as enemies who are forced to work with the party, as a way to just kind of keep the spice of the game and individual story arcs moving forward. So the idea is the factions are, the first faction is the Shades. The Shades is a very pejorative term by people who live in the Crucible, because it implies that all of the other realities that exist in the multiverse are really just shadows cast by the tower. And there's some metaphysical evidence to support that. On the other hand, the tower keeps drawing these people to itself, and they seem to be the only ones to actually be able to affect the Crucible. So do they have more power than people living in the city? Do they have less? Are they any less real? That's one of the things maybe that we will explore in that. You make an awesome NPC, Tink. All right, I will definitely keep that in mind. So, most of the characters starting off are going to be Shades. They're going to be people drawn to the city because, again, that's how the factions create lasting change within the walls of the city. The first faction that grew up around the tower were the Elemental Lords, the Elemental Estates. These are the nobility of the Crucible. The first thing that came into being were the 4 great elements. So there are elemental lords and ladies. There are noble estates. There are going to be families that war against each other. And yet, in the instant the multiverse was born, these lords laid the foundation for the city. They created all of the building blocks of the universe and the tools in the instant they were created. There's a reason why, for the majority of reality, these 4 building blocks exist sort of universally in the larger setting of the Crucible kind of is at the center of, which I may talk about here towards the end. So you have the Elemental Lords, ladies. These estates go out, and they are the ones who initially were doing the main warring for control of the city. The seasons are governed not by a rotation, but by whichever element is in ascendancy at any given time. It's very uncomfortable for people when water or fire are in control. Or earth, hail is, rocky hail is not necessarily something people enjoy being pelted with. There are going to be other smaller factions that are small enclaves that grow up between. So you may have encountered the brief enclave of mud, the enclave of ice, that sort of things. Para-elemental estates, if you will. For those moments when the Montagues and the Capulets find common ground in children, at least for a short season, 2,000 or 3,000 years at most. We've already sort of talked about the high heavens, those that exist above yet not part of the city. No one knows entirely why the high heavens have been bound outside of the city, and yet the fiends exist inside of the city. Ah, Steiner Davy and Restar, you speak to my heart, sir. I am a great fan of the Federated Commonwealth. So, yet the Elemental Lords were the first, yet somehow the catacombs were already existing beneath them, waiting for the first arrival of the dead. Now, the dead, well, they used to be the workforce, public services, manual labor, funerary services for those shades that arrived here. But then something interesting happened. They discovered they were the only ones who could see what we are calling, I'm going to have to make sure I get my terminology right. Thorondic energy, the energy of death, which they start to mint into Animus Jacks. Jacks are the currency of the Crucible. They're little soul stuff that has been minted by the dead. So the liches, the more intelligent dead, now act also as the bankers of the multiverse. People come here to trade in Animus Jacks. We have several edges already and hindrances already built around this. We have deeper readings, which we'll get into later. But the one hindrance I like is a major one called involuntary medium. The dead possess you a lot. Anytime you draw a club as an action card, you're shaken. You fail your spirit roll to remove this shaken at the start of your turn. You have to roll on a chart and see what random spirit has possessed your character, who may prophesy, bemoan their unfinished business, or bodyjack you for several rounds and try to accomplish something. I have several players who definitely want to take that hindrance. So you have the dead, you have the elemental estates. We have said the high heavens are not allowed in the city for a reason, but yet the fiends are here. The fiends are going to be those creatures that in other settings may be called demons and devils. But they have become so closely intertwined that they are not as at war as they are in other settings. Essentially, the old guard, the more lawful, to use a Fantasy 20 terminology, the old guard, the ruling members of this multiversal mob is such a personal word, but let's call it an organized crime, the faction of evil. The devils sort of run the show, and the demons are the up-and-comers. And while they'll war back and forth inside, they try to present a unified face of evil beyond. And then you have the scales, the beat cops of the city, if you will. The knights, the samurai. Those who patrol the city and keep it warded from attacks. Make sure the citizens are protected within the bounds of their governance. Keep a wary eye on the horizon to make sure no faction, power, or deity decides to try and take over the Crucible by force. And those will be the dragons. So there are dragons in the city. There are dragonborn in the city. They command different factions underneath them. And that's kind of the factions of the setting as we kind of see it at this point. So I'm going to toss it out to the chat. Is there something else that you would want to see faction-wise? Now remember, we're going for Arcanopunk, so each of these are going to be outwardly sort of a monolithic megacorp with many factions with it. So we're looking for something that would be kind of as monolithic as some of these factions, and yet still enjoyable to for players to hate or to hang out with. I don't have Faye in here, Becca. Do we want a Fae faction in here? That's what I'm taking. I'm taking from you. We have elementals. The elemental estates are kind of the old nobility of this city. Oh, VB Greg, that is a good question. For what purpose is the Crucible gathering agents, and what does the city look like? The establishing shot shows us. Oh, see, this is one of the things that I adore about Torg. Is it is a very visually cinematic game. I can always tell from the descriptions what is going on. There's always a good establishing shot. And so what we kind of see, Greg, this is interesting. So first of all, let me answer the first question because it's the easiest. On the surface, nobody essentially knows. Um, in the game would know why, but this is a Q&A for the stream, so this is something I want to talk through and establish. Essentially, the idea is the agents that are drawn to the city, because they are from the realities, they possess some sort of metaphysical spark, some sort of metaphysical weight that allows them to actually affect change in the city. So the idea would be is if the elemental lord of fire wanted to expand out and take control of one of the vaults of the dead, they could war for it, but the territory wouldn't necessarily change hands unless it was done through the actions of agents. And the reason for that is because this is the Crucible of Reality. These agents and these factions have existed under a network of treaties and agreements that such large-scale upheaval, because it affects the ripples out into reality, it affects the creations of new realities as well as the current climates on other realities. That essentially those people, the city has decided that the people who actually live in those realities are the ones who will make and affect these changes. So the factions will lie, bully, cajole, force is a strong word, trick, or flat out pay, beg, borrow, steal these agents in order to affect change. Now, there are other reasons that people will come to the city. Mages open portals, magic goes awry all the time. There's also something that we're calling the Elysian Legion, a group of mercenaries a la the French Foreign Legion, where those who come from the rest of reality seeking to undo their past, forget their past, erase their past, can be given a new name and then hire out to go on wars only to come back and be a part of the city. And characters can choose to play a legionnaire who is currently, on leave, able to move their way through the city. The establishing shot, Greg, is a large bowl-like city surrounded by a stone Ouroboros that acts as the wall that extends out. And the center of the city rises into the clouds above of a great stone tower made of a sort of rippling gray stone. Around the tower is where the city exists. It exists in sort of a bowl, if you will. Not like a deep one, but there are rises and falls to the city. And essentially, at this point, there are several large districts or neighborhoods in the city controlled by the different forces. At the north, south, east, and west poles are where the old estates of the elemental lords exist. flavoring and tinging their district with their own elemental theme. The style of the architecture is not something I have come up with at this point, but that is a very good point. I'm starting to get some AI art and art from other sources pulled in, and that is one I'm definitely going to have to ponder. Let me see if I can find the one piece that I have created. I'm going to pull this up in editing while we chat. Let's see how well this works. Here we go. Let's see how this works. I'm just going to transition this over. All right. So this is the first image that I was able to pull up for the Crucible. So this is sort of the genre and the style that we're looking at for the city. The sort of gray overcast with strange creatures and entities flying through the sky. Lights lit not by gas, but by actually the elemental estates themselves. And then there's also the fact that there will also be a bit, if you will, of... We want some technology. Again, we're not trying to emulate a specific point or time in human history, but there are going to be single-shot firearms, elemental boards that allow people to fly above the city. People will be able to race different sorts of flying creatures that exist in the Crucible or brought in from other parts of the multiverse here. What is kind of... So hopefully, Lankmar is a good... Lankmar was one of the touchstones we were working with Phantom. The other so we mentioned the Legionnaires. So Restar and Becca voted for a Fae faction. I would be interested to see how we could pull the Fae into this idea. Any initial ideas, Becca or Restar? Or is this something you're going to make me live come up with something to commit to? The Fae are from a destroyed reality and they act as refugees. I like that, Ben. I like the idea that the Fae may be actually refugees from several different such destroyed realities. And perhaps the Seelie and the Unseelie court are those who have... The Seelie are those who are still willing to engage and defend the idea of the Crucible, while the Unseelie have become nihilists and seek the destruction, just seek an end to their pain and the perceived pain of everything else in reality. That's suitably dark and a wonderful springboard for this. So the Fae who settle here most seek to recreate little enclaves of wonder and beauty and eldritch strangeness, while the majority of the Unseelie Fae are most likely going to be rooted in the cults of the Edgewalkers. Big Trouble in Little Brighton. Oh man, that's a great influence. Now I realize that a lot of this is going to change. A lot of this is going to evolve. Most likely on Sunday when we do our second setting design stream, or not stream, but session that will then get edited down and put out. As I do the writing up of a little player's guide for this, but also through gameplay. That's one of the things that Becca can attest to. I think when we played our 5th edition game, I think our setting guide was only like 2 pages or 3 pages, just enough to establish the the destruction of the previous world and then the place we were starting from. And a lot of it gets built with the characters and through interaction. But this is a good place to start. So let's talk about magic, because magic is something that is kind of key here. We sort of talked about the celestial anchors, right? The fact that they are going to be the paladins, the prophets of this setting, and sort of how their mechanic works is their conduit allows them to channel more energy. They can get god jacked, essentially. This is one of those things that was an idea that entered in my head when reading through a trilogy of fantasy books written by Gareth Ryder Hanrahan. And that sparked me to go back and really look at sort of ancient Near East prophets and how they developed and how awful a lot of their lives were. And so taking this idea of a connection with a god is not always a good thing. And those that get chosen may or may not want the gift they've received. Obviously, with the fiends being in the city or having moved into the city, this is also going to be a place where diabolism is something that is practiced. Summoning of creatures, dispelling of creatures. In addition, we're going to be using the corruption rules out of the Savage Worlds Fantasy Companion to kind of see how that develops. Elementalism, obviously, is a key one that I won't get into too much because I think we all know Elementalists. I'd rather talk about the Dragonbound. So there are those who will pledge their lives to that of a dragon. They go through a bonding ceremony where some of the dragon's blood is mixed with their own, and they get a link to one of the great dragons, essentially becoming a samurai in service of one of the great draconic lords. And the more I talk about this, actually, I do feel like there is going to be a lot of... Greg, I appreciate that question. In my head, the city is not necessarily as Western as it appeared kind of initially on paper. There's a lot more of sort of a Arcano ancient Japan in my head. I'm going to have to dig into that with my players a little more. It's a good thing I'll have Becca here with me. Necromancy, obviously, with the dead. And then we're developing a... one of the things that I love about Deadlands is the idea of how the hucksters work with magic. And Ben has specifically requested that there is a type of card magic. Much like the hucksters, he's getting to play one on our Deadlands game, which you will get to see next week. The second half of. But it doesn't really fit. The idea of making a deal with a spirit and using cards, that doesn't... playing poker doesn't work. And so I noodled on this for a while. And I always like citing my sources. If you know anything about me, I enjoy saying, hey, here is a stepping off point for me. Mainly because one of my favorite authors is blatant about who his influences were. Steven Erickson talks about how much he loves the Black Company and how the Black Company was the impetus for his role-playing game that became the Malazan Books of the Fallen. And so what we're thinking about doing is having something similar to the tarot in the Crucible. That the four great houses, the four minor arcana, will be the elemental houses, the dead, the dragon lords, and the legion. We'll set up all of their different styles, and if we get enough interest, I've already talked with Bob. He's willing to do a tarot deck. And I'm working through the major arcana as well. And the major arcana, as Restar kind of alluded to, maybe an Easter egg of lore kind of going forward. And I should also point out that, like many things I do on the Iconic Production channel, I do because I love them. Something I tell all of my players before we start streaming and continually as we're streaming is that, there have been companies that have been very gracious to sponsor shows on the Iconic Production channel. And we always do our best to represent those games to the best of our abilities. But at the end of the day, the start and the end of every session, my focus is on the people at the table. Are they having fun? And so, yes, we're showing off Savage Worlds and kind of how we can tinker and break and make a new fantasy world using the toolbox they gave us. In the end, if my 4 players are enjoying it, if my guest stars are enjoying it, that's really what's most important to me. The fact that you guys show up and enjoy is an amazing boon to everyone here at the table. So yeah, that is kind of the focus of this game. So what I'm trying to say is a lot of things that I'm talking about here are being built in response to things that you guys liked, things that we've talked about in the Iconic Production Discord, and things that my players want. So this tarot deck, Ben and I were kind of talking back and forth, and he was really like wanting something to be a magic user who is so tied to the shape of reality that they can divine something. And so I have a tarot deck that at the beginning of the day he will make a roll on to see how many cards he gets to draw. Before I go further than that, let's see. Greg is vibing off the what if the deck is the deck of the city, actual locations and character from the Crucible's past. The next name for this sort of casting could be street magic. As the Crucible changes, the deck changes. Yes, Greg, that is exactly where I'm going with this. I brought up Malazan Books of the Fallen because they have the deck of dragons. And as new gods arise and old gods fall, the deck will change accordingly. So there's these great scenes where people will be casting the cards and get a card they made each of their cards by hand. And yet there's this new card in the deck. How did it happen? What does it mean? Sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's not. And so yes, the idea will be that I will be changing the deck throughout the campaign based off the player's actions and interactions. I like the idea that it is called street magic. And so the idea will be they will be able to make a divination roll at the start of the adventure or at the start of a day. And that divination roll will determine what powers they have access to. They will, and again, so here's the thing about at least me as a game designer. I enjoy cobbling together my favorite parts of other games. So one of the things, and I realize that this is going to be a arcane background for a very specific type of player. And we're going to be making tweaks and changes as we go through this. But one of the things I love about Torg is the way cards work. I love the Destiny and Cosm and Drama cards. And I'm kind of leaning into that with this idea. If you draw one of the minor arcana, you will have access to one of the other types of magic that you can play and gain access to certain powers from that type of magic. Arcane background is what it's called in Savage Worlds, for the scene or until you play a new one. You get one of the major arcana, well, that's going to give you a really powerful benefit, but it goes away almost at once. And so the idea is that these diviners, these street mages, who I'm now thinking a lot of people look down on because they're manipulating things they shouldn't be able to, and it's not the way the order is done. They don't know what they're going to get at the start of every session or day. And they've got to hoard these cards and figure out which ways they want to use them. See, this is why I wanted to do this all on stream. Because this expands my pool of people I'm talking to from 4 or 5 to 8 to 12. Will they read inversions? Well, the answer is not for the minor. Now, dang it. I was going to say not for the minor arcana, but the major arcana will depend on which way it's flipped. Because yes, I had ideas for the inversions. Because I love tarot. But it all depends on how crazy I want to make this arcane background. Because part of the thing that we need to keep in mind with Savage is the 3 F's of Savage, which is really weird for me to say, but fun, fast, and furious. So I want to make sure that when we design something. All right, Tink has a vote for make it as crazy as possible. I may do that. Because what's the worst thing that happens? Either I change it in the next version of the document, or people don't pick it to play. And if people don't pick it to play, well, then it's not good design. But we could do something with the minor arcana that basically says your powers are picked. The powers you get are based off the inversions. Facing one way, they give you certain sets of abilities. So if they're inverted, they get the other ones. Oh, man. Yeah, maybe an advanced play option. I like that. Ben is going to be so sorry he chose to have me design this. But we're going to make it work. And again, like I said, most of this play document will be available to the Iconic Production patrons. So if you're a member of the Iconic Production patronage, you will get access to the work in progress documents. Also, we're going to have somebody who's going to do recaps, like do a written recap of the sessions as we roll forward. I'm actually thinking about making a site for it so that people can see the recaps, figure out who different NPCs are, get art for those NPCs, and sort of roll it forward. Because that was one of the things that was really difficult, both in our Fading Suns game and in the Horseman game, was just sort of management and keeping track of everything. So if you're a fan of Iconic Production and you have any desire to help with this, please let me know. So, there's a couple of other ideas floating around in my head that are sort of untethered. The idea that the energy, the material that is used to power the firearms, we're going to do one-shot firearms in this game. Maybe. I'll see what the players want. Right now I'm thinking towards single shot firearms and then get into the mix. You have to be very careful with it because the alchemical substance that is pulled together from the dead and the estate of Earth, well, let's just say it reacts with fire elementals the same way certain amphetamines do with humans. And so you definitely don't want fire elementals interacting or getting hold of the priming caps for your for your weapons. Yes, Becca, I'm bringing Rustfire, which is from something that a game that Becca has played many, many years in my world for that. And I will let you know, Becca, that Tanar is connected to the tower in the Crucible. In fact, it has been referenced several other times in Tanar games, not as such. Ben, welcome. Oh, watching Lockwood and Company, you feel like there's some ideas that you could use here. Welcome, by the way. Restart, if you want to do the write-ups for the recaps, I would not only appreciate it, but I would find a way to thank you for that. So, what else can we talk about? We haven't talked about the tower. So the tower itself stands sort of inviolable at the center of the Crucible. Nobody knows what its purpose exactly is. Nobody knows exactly why it was first. But everybody sort of understands, at least those who study it, that it is kind of the linchpin, the tent pole to existence. The city and the Ouroborean Wall, even the elemental lords and the dead, on some level, protect it from destruction. Currently, there are only 2 levels of the tower that are actually accessible to not even everybody, but just to people in the city. There's the council chambers where things are debated, discussed, interacted with. The nobility gets together and gets to feel like they have some control over the city. And there's the tower that is the level of the Lord Ruler, the entity that is in charge nominally, that sits above the great factions. That changes from time to time. However, there are other levels of the tower. These levels connect to things like the realms of the dead, the thousand halls, different levels and planes of existence, and those levels are really only accessible to those the tower wants them to be. There are countless legends, urban stories, myths of people turning a corner in the Crucible and finding themselves on a level in the tower for a specific purpose, for a specific reason, never finding it again once they complete what they're supposed to do. Sometimes it's as simple as making a move on a go board. Single move. Sometimes they find themselves facing off against someone in a duel to the death for a reason they have no concept of. Some of them find themselves reliving a painful memory multiple times, being asked the same question over and over again. No one really knows for sure to what level is the city and the tower sentient. Do they have awareness? Are they aware together? Are they at odds? Are they dependent on each other? These are things that I have hastily scrawled notes for, but no real answers to yet. And yes, Ben, one of the main inspirations was the child roller to the Dark Tower came. There is something beautiful about the Dark Tower and the way it invades everything else that King writes. A magnum opus, if you will, an idea so big that he has to keep returning to it. Now, a little aside, this is something we do as GMs, something we do as players. We all know the player, maybe you are the player, who always plays the thief. Not just because it's comfortable, but because on some level you are wanting to tell that story again. A different iteration, a different take. But there's something there that attracts you to that story. As GMs, we have themes that keep coming back up. Is it time travel? Is it great sacrifice? Is it betrayal? Is it the fact that maybe safe houses aren't safe? I don't know what safe house trauma I carry with me, but my players bear the brunt of that reoccurring theme. Even when I swear to them up and down that a safe house is safe, somebody plays a card that makes the safe house unsafe. What do? This idea of creation and uncreation, the void and reality, this is not my first time coming to the tower, so to speak. So I'm interested to see what we'll discover along the way. Restart, I can count on your reliably reckless energy in every game that I run. So I very much look forward to the inevitable moment when you get to break into the Crucible game. Some of us always want to play a druid because we always really wanted to be a druid. I mean, who am I to argue? So, I mean, it's been about an hour. I feel like we've worked through some really cool ideas. Ben, you missed the part about the Fae being refugees from several destroyed realities. So, on Sunday, we're going to refine this even more, and I'm going to get a document put up probably before the end of the Pan-Pacifica arc that we're about to do, and put it out to the patrons to get your feedback. I'll have commenters turned on. You guys will get to read through the thing, add comments, add suggestions, and here's the thing. This is going to be a living document. It's going to be a living setting. If one thing that we've done on Iconic since the beginning is we have told what I think are really great stories, but we've always played in other people's sandboxes, and this is our chance to play in our own sandbox for a little while. And I want to make sure that everyone who's a patron, everyone who's a subscriber, everyone who comes in on chat gets to bring some of their favorite toys and put them in the sandbox. So, with that, I think we're going to bring this stream. I am going to call it the Crucible Constitution, Ben. This is why I keep you around, buddy. I'm going to bring the stream to a close. I'm going to enjoy the rest of my cognac. I'm going to enjoy the rest of my coffee. I'm going to transcribe the notes from this adventure, or this session. We're going to be talking about a little bit more about Savage Worlds, and just not a review, but continue to develop some of the edges. We're going to talk about creating edges and hindrances in Savage Worlds, which applies to things like creating perks in Torg, creating feats in your 5th edition game. Here's the thing. The longer you play a game, the more you know it. And sort of the secret that we're going to talk about on Thursday, not to bury the lead at all, is the fact that you can change the rules for your playstyle. It doesn't have to be balanced as long as your group is enjoying it. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about why and how we would create new perks, edges, those kind of things, as well as new hindrances. Saturday, Evan and I will be here at 10 o'clock Central, Saturday morning to discuss our next episode of Exploring Glorantha, which will be about the God Time. And then next week, we will be back on Tuesday to wrap up our Deadlands game. It's called Something Wicked, and that also has a lot to do with the Wichita Witches. So, thank you all for coming and just hanging out and talking games and talking our new setting. I'm looking forward to it. We're going to start off with just 4 people in the studio, which is something I haven't been able to do since the Fading Suns game. Before, we did a lot more virtual and remoting in just due to circumstances. I am really excited to have a physical group at the table. Not that I haven't ever been a fan of everybody that we've had join us. So, until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, stay gaming. Greg, I appreciate that. Looking forward to see the shadow of the tower falling upon me. I hope that when you do, you find its blessing on your path. So until next time, thank you, everybody. I will see you all on Thursday for more Behind the Screen and on Saturday for Exploring Glorantha. Till then, have a good one.